Again, the priority is NCEA students in levels and deciles 1 to 3. We have further equipment waiting to be shipped from overseas. In terms of the hard packs of materials that are going out to those who don't have access to digital devices, I can confirm that so far we have sent out 80,000 packs in English and 10,000 packs in Māori. And we know that people are tuning into our TV channels to see familiar faces like Susie Cato on the box. The latest information we've got is that 649,000 people tuned in during the first 3 days last week. The parental pages from the Ministry of Education's website had over 100,000 visits over those 3 days. So I want to thank the profession for their goodwill and their professionalism. To teachers, principals and centre leaders, they've got an important role to play in getting New Zealand back on its feet. I know they know that, and I want to thank them for it. So finally, to all of the parents out there who I know are juggling working from home, caring for your kids, my message to you is the same as it's been since the beginning. Be kind to yourself. We are not expecting parents to completely replace the classroom environment at home, so be reasonable in your expectations of yourselves. These are extraordinary times, so thank you for your understanding. We're doing our very best to minimise the impact on children's learning and on their well-being as we work together to keep New Zealanders safe. Happy to answer your questions.
Minister Hipkins, what are you doing to help those schools who might be disproportionately affected because, for example, in areas where both parents have to go back to work or where distance learning isn't an option?
So obviously where both parents have to go back to work, where distance learning isn't an option, that's one of the reasons why we're saying that we do need schools and early learning services to be able to provide support to those families. In some cases, it's also going to be possible, as families look to slightly enlarge their bubble, for them to be sharing care arrangements across other close relatives, for example, so that those kids can stay home if they don't need to go back.
There will be some schools, just by dint of their decile or where they are and the parents' work, that are going to be facing a lot more kids coming than some schools who are well set up for distance learning and may have more parents at home. I mean, is there a breakdown, and are you going to give specific support to those schools that may have many more kids than they might have anticipated or potentially be able to deal with?
So one of the things that this week gives us, and next Tuesday as well gives us, is an opportunity for schools to touch base with their parent communities and get an understanding of how many kids may be needing to come through the door next week when schools and early learning services start to reopen for kids from next Wednesday. If you look at the overall numbers, we're expecting around 400,000 New Zealanders to go back to work. We're still expecting around 1 million New Zealanders to be at home. So even in the situations where parents are going back to work, it may be that there are other family arrangements that can be put in place for those kids not to need to go back to school. And I'd certainly encourage that. So if you're enlarging your bubble slightly by bringing in an auntie or an uncle or someone else who could be at home with the kids because they're working from home anyway, that would be a good arrangement.
Are there going to be some situations though where schools are going to have to say, we can't take your kid, we've already filled our complement and we just can't take any more, and what would the response be in that particular situation?
Look, it's too early to say that. We've got, over this coming week, we're keeping very, very closely in contact with schools so that if they do start to get concerned that they're going to have a whole deluge of students that they couldn't adhere to public health guidance in bringing them back through the school gate, then we'll work with them. And it may be that we can help to spread some of that load. But it's very early at this point. We only made this, these decisions very recently. So we do need to give the education system time to digest that and to reach out to their parent communities.
CEs and schools that we've spoken to are extremely worried and many won't be opening under level 3. Is that a choice that they can make?
Look, we're not being too heavy-handed in this. Obviously, I do want early learning services to reopen if they can. The arrangements are going to be different though, because different centres have different student, child populations, different needs. They're physically quite different, so the physical layout of those services can be quite different. Some are very, very open, and some of them have smaller rooms and smaller spaces that make that preserving bubbles within them more possible. So we're working through that with each individual centre, and I'm not going to set a hard and fast rule around that. We are going to continue to support early learning services during level 3, so that we know that they'll be there at the end of level 2, when we move to level 2.
Teachers are telling us it's impossible to socially distance children under 5. You have young children, how would you do it?
Look, as I've been very clear, one of the reasons that we've got guidance, and the Director General, I'm sure, would be happy to comment on this, one of the reasons we've got the public health guidance out there that we have is that we know that when you're dealing with a small group of very young children, under 5-year-olds, they are going to come into contact with each other. They are going to need to be picked up now and then by an adult. And so that physical distancing isn't going to be possible in that environment. So there are other things that we can put in place there. Keeping the bubble size quite small, making sure that we're doing all of the hygiene things we need to do, and of course, the work that we have all done as a country over the last 4 weeks to minimise the risk of COVID-19 coming through the door in the first place.
The comments that the Director General made yesterday, you said that children don't tend to pass COVID-19 onto adults. What evidence or peer-reviewed literature are you basing that claim on?
Well, the first evidence that came out about this was from the WHO China combined review in China, particularly in Wuhan, which was a 10-day mission there, and that report came out in March, and that was very clear. In fact, of all the people they interviewed who had been involved in dealing with COVID-19, not one could recall any instance of a child passing infection to an adult. And this seems to be the pattern that is being found in other countries. And we've, of course, got here in New Zealand, just a small number of our cases are in under 10-year-olds for a start, and all of those are actually linked to transmission within the family setting.
Epidemiologists and paediatricians that we've spoken to say that there's conflicting evidence that that's the case and it's too early to draw a conclusion. What's your response to them?
Well, I think there's always emerging evidence. At the moment, I think the weight of evidence does suggest exactly as we've laid out in our public health advice, and we will keep watching that. But I should say that in the fundamentals of public health and how it's being applied in the education setting are the same as what we're advising and are being applied in other settings. So it is the physical distancing, the small groups to, if there is, very unlikely that a case comes through the gate, it's confined to a small group if there is any close contact. But I just would reiterate the point the Minister has made. We're announcing 5 cases today. We can trace them to extant cases, and if we go back and we're going back and scrutinising every case back to the 1st of April, but at the moment there are only 4 cases left where we're not sure exactly the route of transmission, but even then it's reasonably clear in 2 of them where the infection was got, and it actually was first got, and it predated actually the lockdown. So there's increasingly encouraging information that the likelihood of someone with COVID-19 going through the school gate, as the Minister said, is very, very low in the first place.
Minister, if you're saying that it's safe enough to open schools and for these students to be back, why not open up schools completely if you're confident that they don't transmit the disease?
Because one of the things that gives us confidence is that ability when we have a smaller number in an early learning service or in a school, that smaller number is a key part of our ability to keep people in smaller bubbles, to stop those bubbles coming into contact with one another. If you start to have services and schools operating at full capacity, that becomes a lot more difficult. So I'm confident that at level 3 they can operate not at full strength, but for a smaller number.
Will teachers have the option to say, no, I don't feel safe coming to work, I don't want to?
Look, we do expect teachers to be doing their bit. My message to those who are in a higher risk bracket, either because they themselves are in a higher risk category or because they've got someone living in their household who is in a higher risk category, is make sure you're talking to your school or your early learning service about that, because we're going to need people continuing to support the students who are distant